You also should not tell me that, because that makes me want to Annie Wilkes my way over to your house.
Oh my God. Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is What You Should Read,
the podcast where we should all over our books.
And we just spent about 15 minutes trying to get set up. We had some technical difficulties. But we're here now, and we're going to talk about books, and it's going to be great.
Yay!
Kelly had to answer the "Can you hear me now?" question. So thank you, Kelly, for your patience. Kelly, what are you reading this week?
Well, I am reading The Living Dead by George Romero, and I'm trying to finish it before book club next Saturday so that I can loan it to Dorian.
Love it, yeah.
Yes, we've already discussed it on Facebook. Dorian is my horror buddy, so I'm trying to finish. I've been reading it forever. I still have like 200 pages to go. It is something else, and it's about zombies, obviously, and I thought I knew what I was expecting and in for, and it is probably one of the most disgusting things I've ever read. So don't borrow it from him.
Moving on. Rachel, what are you reading this week?
I am reading Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev.
Nice.
I'm almost halfway through. It's really good so far. Definitely a very cute Pride, Prejudice retelling. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. Some of the characters, I'm like, you're so mean. So I'm not sure I like that, but the story is really interesting. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Nice.
And I did start The Marriage of Opposites by Alice Hoffman, which I hauled a couple weeks ago from the library. I think I'm going to really like this book. I'm only like 30 pages in, but so far it's really interesting. So yeah, that's what I'm reading.
Nice. I finished Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, the Hunger Games prequel. I gave it 2 stars. It's really not worth your time, guys. I took one for the team. Okay, so no one else on the podcast has to read this book if you don't want to. It was just so, like, I don't care that much about his backstory, about President Snow's backstory. He is just as awful as you would think. He's such a flip-flopper, even when there are times where you think, oh, he might have some redeemable thoughts. It's like, no, it's only ever just what he can like do for himself or what his wants and needs are. It's never about anyone else. And he's basically an incel at one point in the book. And yeah, I gave it 2 stars. I'm still working on The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which we're reading for book club. That is going much better. I'm about 3/4 of the way through, so I should finish it soon. And I think it's going to be probably a 4-star read. For me, I don't want to talk too much about it because we're going to talk about it at book club. And yeah, I'm liking it though. It's not as good for me as the Broken Earth trilogy was, but it's still solid.
You're working your way through that really fast. You started it like 30 hours ago.
Yes, I've had a very relaxing weekend of a lot of book reading, so it's been good.
That's going to be my next read. And really, whatever's happening in it, it's going to be easier and better than The Living Dead. I feel very confident saying that. Yeah. I guess we'll find out for sure. Yeah. But now is when we talk about our new book adjacent news. So guys, did you hear about this? Marley Diaz, who founded #1000BlackGirlBooks, has started a new Netflix series called Bookmarks, and each episode's going to be about 5 minutes long. It'll have Black celebrities reading books by Black authors to you. It starts September 1st, and it has people like Tiffany Haddish and Common reading books, and it sounds so awesome, and I am very excited. September 1st on Netflix.
What kind of books are they reading?
I believe children's books, and obviously super short ones since each one's like about 5 minutes. But if I remember right from the article, they said Black celebrities reading books by Black authors that personify the Black experience. So it It should be so awesome. And Marley Diaz, you might remember, I think it was last year or the year before, realized that there weren't many books by Black authors featuring Black children. And so she started actually collecting them, I think, for her library and for other school libraries. And just, I mean, I don't want to be like, I don't know how old she is, but in my mind, she's certainly young. And what an awesome person making a difference, and now making a difference for like everybody, because pretty much everybody, I think, has Netflix at this point.
Yeah.
But I think there's also going to be videos on YouTube. So even if you don't have Netflix, you know, you can still see.
That's good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that sounds great.
That was too.
Oh.
Oh God, I'm sorry. You know, you can just cut my mic and be like, oh, here's mine, Kelly. You're having some technical difficulties. That's going around today.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry, Rachel.
Battle of the book news.
Yeah. I love that
I love that. Well, mine is happy news, but I just wanted to talk about this. Did you hear about this? There were 2 Black authors who were going to do a live event for a bookstore in Brooklyn, Word Bookstore, and unfortunately it was Zoom bombed. It was Danielle Clayton and Jordan Ifweko, who is a YA debut author, YA fantasy. And they were doing this Zoom event and immediately got Zoom bombed and harassed, racist language. It was awful. And so it's just like, there's this whole conversation happening now about just, if you're having an event, making sure that security measures are in place, because the bookstore has since apologized, and they said, we clearly dropped the ball and we're not careful enough in setting up our meeting, and we're going to do better in the future. But yeah, it's just like, and it was awful. And the authors even said, you know, we had a feeling this might happen because they didn't feel like the Zoom link was secure enough when it went out. Wow. So yeah, I mean, especially if you have Black authors or authors of color on, like, you have to make sure that it's not a public link. And there's a lot of ways that you can make sure your Zoom event is safe.
All right. So our next segment we're going to do is recent acquisitions.
Okay.
So Julia, what have you recently acquired?
So I was on NetGalley, just sort of giving my reviews for the books I had been given, and I was looking at what they had, and this one popped up called Athena's Choice by Adam Boostrom. And I think it was published last year, but it must be out in paperback this spring, I think, because it was on NetGalley. And it is basically says, like, Athena is your typical girl in the year 2099. She watches reality TV, she eats good food, and sometimes she wonders what the world would be like if there were still men. It's been 50 years. So basically it's one of those, you know, sci-fi futures where it's all women and no men. What's interesting to me is that the author, I think, is a man. I don't know for sure, but so that was interesting to me. So I was just kind of curious as to what because I as a premise, that's always a premise that I'm drawn to. I think is like an interesting thing to think about. It's like, yeah, I mean, technically we don't need men to survive as a species. So it's obviously the premise of a lot of books out there. But this one seemed interesting because it was written from a teenage girl's perspective. So I'm curious. I haven't started it yet, but it looks interesting.
I got, my friend Lisa has a book coming out in November called Don't Judge Me, and it is actually based on a true story. There's a high school in Maryland, I think Bethesda, and they found out, it might be a middle school, but they found out that the boys had this actual list ranking girls on their looks, and the girls found out and were basically like, yeah, no.
Not okay.
Yeah, and Lisa found out and wrote a whole book on it, and her books are just amazing and wonderful. And this one is out in November, I think November 10th, and I'm so excited. I'm gonna try and wait to read it until closer to the release date, but I don't know, because she's one of my favorites, and it's right here in front of me in my hands. So I actually might be done with this week's episode. Bye, guys.
No, come back.
sounds great.
It's so good. I mean, I don't know, but Lisa has 100% success rate, and she has books for like YA and middle grade, and she's just the best. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Great. So I was at my local indie book / music store on Friday because Taylor Swift, had a bunch of signed albums available. So I was there anyway, and I was perusing the stacks of books, and they had a bunch of ones that I wanted. So I was actually listening to the audiobook for Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower by Brittany Cooper. And I started it it was Thursday. I started it on Thursday morning, and I finished it Thursday evening, the audiobook. Wow. It was so good. And I really, as I was listening to it, I was like, I want the hard copy so I can annotate it. So I picked up Eloquent Rage paperback. I also, so everyone knows how much I love The Deep by River Solomon, and I convinced my local book club to read it this year. I don't know which month we're going to read it. We were discussing kind of some books that we want to read, and I suggested The Deep, and they all went for it. So I picked up the paperback of that so that I could have a hard copy for book club, because I also had listened to that on audiobook before.
This cover is gorgeous.
Yeah, the paperback is really nice.
The hardcover cover is also gorgeous. Yeah. This is completely different.
So different.
Love it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. And then I also picked up Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. So that was one that Julia had recommended, and it just definitely sounds like something I should read. So
I'm halfway through it, and I highly recommend taking your time and like annotating it as you go, because it's obviously huge. But,
it's huge, yes.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's great. Okay, so now that we've done recent acquisitions, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking with Liza Wiemer, author of The Assignment, which is out today.
Yes.
Joined by author Liza Wiemer. Hi, Liza. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you guys. I love your show. I mean, I watch it on YouTube, so I get to see you guys all the time. I love it.
Thank you for plugging our YouTube channel. That's great. Well, we're so excited to have you because your new book, The Assignment, publishes today, the day this episode drops, Tuesday, August 25th. So congratulations. How does it feel now that it's out?
It's unbelievable. It's been over a 3-year journey. And so to be here at this point is absolutely incredible. Because you go through a time where you don't know what's going to happen. And I didn't have a contract for this book. I didn't have an agent. Wow. So it has been a step-by-step process. And so, yeah, publication is going to be incredible.
Okay, obviously the first thing we always start with is, what are you reading?
So what am I reading? Oh my goodness. I am reading an arc of a Marilyn Monroe book. It was published by, or it's going to be published by Candlewick. Of course, I'm so not good when it comes down to titles of books, but it's in free verse poetry, and I'm learning things about Marilyn Monroe I didn't know about. And I think anyone who's intrigued with Marilyn Monroe or Hollywood will really enjoy this book. So yeah, that's what I'm reading.
Cool, that sounds amazing. And we'll get the actual title and tweet it out and mention it on our social. But Also, and I feel like we've talked about this a little bit, but how has the pandemic affected your reading and or writing?
So I love to do audiobooks, and in the beginning of the pandemic, I could not concentrate on any audiobook. I found my mind really wandering, and I could not, I mean, I just had to stop for several months. And so, but lately I've been listening to them and enjoying them. And I've been going back to some old favorites. So yesterday I just reread The Sea of Tranquility by Katja Millet, which happens to be one of my most favorite books. It was an Alex winner back probably like in the, I'm guessing around 2012 or so. And it still holds up for me. And I finished the book and then had some work to do. So I put the audiobook on in the background. So it's affected me from that perspective, but that's, you know, slowly I've been able to get back into audiobooks. I think because, you know, I work from home and I've always, with at least the writing, mostly work from home, there hasn't been too much of an impact from that perspective. But there are a few things that I really used to love doing. I love to cook. And so I really loved going grocery shopping. The joy out of that has completely left me. You know, it's like, get in there, do what I need to do, and get home. And that has become a very tense experience for me, where before I used to love and linger and look at different products and, you know, just really enjoyed it. And now it's just as quickly as possible. On a positive note, I will say that I'm loving the opportunity to watch, you know, podcasts like yours, and I'm gaining so much. I'm learning and discovering new books, and I'm taking different classes. These are opportunities I never would have had if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So I think this is a huge plus. Obviously, I'm unbelievably distraught with the impact that this has had on, you know, our country, on the world. And it's shocking, and it's very hard not to, you know, find myself falling into a place of despair, like I'm certain, you know, you guys are too. So that's kind of, you know, I try to find something positive from it, but I also am just like, wow, we need a vaccination. This has to, you know, this is just stressful.
We just did an episode about rereads, and it's interesting that you talked about rereading an audiobook of one of your favorite books. I find that to be also very comforting, especially during times like this, where it's like, yeah, sometimes my brain can just not focus on something new because the world is just feels so devastating right now. So I'm right there with you. What is your writing process usually like, and has it changed at all recently due to the pandemic, or is it pretty much how it's always been?
So I have not been doing much writing. Shh, don't tell my agent.
You also should not tell me that, because that makes me want to Annie Wilkes my way over to your house.
Okay, but I did finish a picture book, so that was really great, and I'm very excited about that. But I just have been struggling to dig into this next idea. I keep thinking about it, but I'm just, because the world has changed so much that the world that I had pictured for my character no longer exists. And so I think that's where I'm struggling with the writing process. But in general, I have a very strange writing process in that so the first thing that I will do is when I have an idea, I will imagine what will happen in the beginning, and beginnings are really tough for me, so that's really loose. But I have a whole story arc. I know where I want this book to end. And then I sit down and I get to know my characters. And the cool thing about this is that there is no way that you can ever know yourself unless you've got a photographic memory, which I do not. There's no way that you can know everything about yourself. There's no way you can know everything about your neighbors, you know, a parent, best friends. No matter how close you are to them, there are still things in your own life and in the lives of those people that you really care about that you will never know.
Yeah.
But with your characters, you need to know absolutely every last detail. And it's critical to have all that background, even though you're not going to utilize it in a book. It just creates a well-rounded, real-life character. So I spend a lot of time having conversations with my characters and writing down answers to questions that I have for them. So that's the first step. And then I immerse myself in my character's world, I should say. And I do this by, I could sit down and start writing. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever time I wake up, and continue on until, 11 o'clock at night, with very few breaks getting up to eat or to talk to anyone. So it's very intense.
Yeah.
And most people I know cannot do that. They need to have breaks. I'm going to say that I don't think it's necessarily healthy, but it is my process. And I like to be in that world, and that world for me feels real.
Yeah.
And what is really going on in this world, that's not what's real for me at that moment.
Wow.
So yeah, it gets pretty intense for me. And I don't need much sleep when I'm working like that. I just need enough to recharge.
Yeah. That feels so exciting. Like you're just immersing yourself into the world and like you don't come out of it until, I don't know, that sounds cool. But also, like you said, probably not healthy.
Well, when my kids were really little, this habit kind of started from the fact that I felt it was really important for me to give them my focus.
Yeah.
So as soon as they were in bed, I would start the writing process. And I would sometimes go until 4 o'clock in the morning and then get up with them and just do it all over again. So I think that's where I got into this habit.
Wow. Is it any different with a book like The Assignment, which is loosely based on a true event or multiple true events? As you mentioned in the author's note at the end, there's all these different kinds of assignments that have been given that are, and for those who haven't read the book, it's based on an assignment that a history teacher gives that is very offensive, and it's basically asking students to role play as Nazis, basically, in a history class. And these students stand up for not doing the assignment, and it goes from there. But is it any different when you're taking a story that's loosely based on true events? And as you mentioned in your author's note, there's assignments like this that have happened, multiple times. So, what's it like to take something that's based on real life, and then how does it evolve from there?
So the fascinating thing about the assignment is, as you said, that it was inspired by true events. So the amazing situation, that the kind of like story behind the story, is I happen to have been in the area where the original assignment took place at that moment. So it was in upstate New York, and my event was planned on July 25th, 2016. I had received a message via Facebook from a librarian by the name of Wendy Scafaldo. Scafalo. And Wendy asked if I would be interested. I'm sorry for butchering your name, Wendy. But she asked me if I would come to her area to do some, book events. And I was like, wow, yeah, that sounds amazing. So she put this whole thing into action. And also just the fact that I said yes instead of no, because she had never done anything like this before, and we were just trying to figure things out. So here I was, that was in April of 2017. So I'm from Wisconsin, I'm in this area, and it's pouring rain, and I was at the place, in the vicinity of where I was supposed to go for this book signing. And because it was raining, I decided not to get out of my car. And I went on Facebook, and that's when I saw an article about an assignment that students refused to do, two students refused to do, Archer Shurtleff and Jordan April, who refused to do an assignment advocating for the Holocaust. And then I went, oh my gosh, I'm in this small town. So that led to an amazing experience where I walked into the bookstore where I was supposed to do this book signing, and there was Jordan. And that led to, writing this novel. So, so from moment one, I said to both Jordan and Archer, this book is not going to be about you. This is a book that's been inspired by your courage. So from there, I had to do a tremendous amount of research about the Holocaust. I interviewed so many people, and my author's note is really long because of all the interviews that I did. And it was intense research. I watched a lot of original footage from the Holocaust. I read multiple books about the Wannsee Conference, which was the conference where 15 top Nazi leaders to discuss how to implement the final solution. And this is the so-called debate that the assignment was based on. These Nazis arguing how best to get rid of Europe's 11 million Jews. And I mean by get rid of, they already realized, well, we can't expel them. No one wants the Jews, so this means we need to figure out how to get rid of them. Should we murder them outright, or should we sterilize them, put them in work camps, and put them in ghettos? So in other words, murder them outright or work them to death. And so that was the debate. And for some of these 15 Nazis, the idea of exterminating Jews right out versus maybe having them die by more quote unquote natural causes, torturing them, was the debate. So it was ludicrous. I mean, it's not a debate in the sense of what that word means. And so ultimately, that was one of my starting points, was to understand what took place on January 20th, 1942. So it was a lot of intense research. And it did impact me in a way that I didn't really realize until after I got out of that phase. I think in some ways it would probably be like someone who was living with a Holocaust survivor. I'm not saying that my experience is anywhere near the same of being raised in that situation, but I think that intensity of living with those horrors were with me every single day. And I rarely got a break from it, and I didn't realize that until I got out of that experience.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's definitely, the subject matter does bring up a lot of just feelings for me, and thinking about all of the injustices in the world and how horrific the Holocaust was, and yet how many horrific things still go on today, and just the climate that we're in. I'm just wondering if any of that started to influence the writing, or if it influenced how the book evolved, because I do think that this is a great book for teens to read and be inspiring to them to stand up against injustice.
Yeah, without a doubt, I was shocked by how many assignments are out there like this. When a teacher in New York had her white students bid on Black students in a mock slave auction, it's appalling. And that was just one out of many that actually hit the news. But there are so many others that young adults don't feel comfortable calling out. And I received messages on various platforms like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook from people who had heard about this novel and said, "Oh, I've got a story for you." And every single person who didn't speak out regretted it. Those who went and talked to their teacher, or a parent who eventually went and talked to the teacher or a principal, for them it was like a huge relief off of their shoulders. So these types of assignments and these kinds of injustices and all forms of injustice must be called out. And a book like this, that's what it should inspire people to do. It doesn't matter if you're 12 years old and reading this book, or if you are 75 years old and reading this book. I cannot imagine anyone reading this book and looking at the world in the same way that they did before they picked up this novel. I think it will be an eye-opening experience for them.
I totally agree.
Absolutely. Great. So Liza, I wanted to ask you about, and for those listening who haven't read the assignment yet, this is a little bit of a spoiler. So skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to hear any spoilers. But I wanted to talk to you, Liza, about the principal and sort of how you came to the decision of him really not having any consequences from this whole ordeal, how he pretty much got off scot-free. And I'm really curious, and to me it's like that's definitely very realistic. Those in power will find a scapegoat and get off with their hands totally clean, say it wasn't my fault, I didn't do anything wrong, even though they're in charge. So it is their fault. So I'm very curious kind of how you approached that storyline and, just, how you decided to, the outcomes for the principal and Mr. Bartley and all of the adults who were involved.
Yeah, when it came down to Principal McNeil, that was a really difficult situation. Part of my research had to do with finding out that, at least in the state of New York, it's like nearly impossible, if not impossible, to fire someone that's been tenured.
Oh.
So I focused on Mr. Bartley, and I created a scenario where he could be fired.
Mm.
If he had been tenured, it wouldn't have happened.
Of course not, yeah.
So that was pretty much what was behind that. Same thing with the Commissioner of Education. I don't know if in real life the real commissioner could have been fired from her position. So in my novel, I made the commissioner male, and so even though there were people calling for the commissioners firing and for all of these individuals to be fired, it's just such a difficult process. But with Mr. Bartley, because he was not within that time frame, the consequences were really, really severe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some people say that, he shouldn't have been fired. I'm sure there are people that will have felt like, what? He paid the price for, in the media, and he was repentant. He should have kept his job. And I have to admit, I wrote Mr. Bartley in a way that I would hope that people would feel some sympathy for him, because this is not an evil man. He's not a Hitler. He made some really bad decisions, and it took him a while to evolve. And I think we see this today, that people will have a belief system and they will hold on to that belief system. They just feel like they are so right that it's hard to hear someone else's perspective.
Yeah.
And when you hear it from teens and you're an adult, oftentimes adults just feel like, I'm the adult, you're the kid, I know better than you, I have more experience than you, I have been teaching for X number of years. So they're not looking at this from the perspective of, geez, these are really intelligent teens. Maybe I should, give this a little thought. No, Mr. Bartley especially got really locked into the fact that he truly believed that he was giving these kids an excellent lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I agree. Like, I definitely did feel sympathy for him at the end. I mean, he was so frustrating for most of the book, right? But at the end, you definitely did portray him as a sympathetic character. And then, like Rachel, I was just so peeved that the principal didn't have any consequences and just, got to keep his job, even though he should have put a stop to it immediately, if not when the kids came to him, when they had that organization, and that the name of which is escaping me right now, called to the school and said, this is wrong. You need to put a stop to it. At that point, I think a reasonable person in an administrative role would take action. But it's just so frustrating. But you did a good job putting me on that roller coaster. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say too, the other teacher, the one who basically asked to speak to Logan and was like, if I could take back that recommendation I wrote for you, I would. You are awful. Like, he and the principal were like the villains of the story for me. Like, Mr. Bartley was just, I mean, I think a good person who didn't realize he was making a mistake fast enough. But I think a lot of us make mistakes and we don't realize it fast enough.
And it's easy to let your ego or whatever kind of become offended from somebody saying like, your assignment is horrible for these reasons. And it's like, it's easy to get defensive.
Yeah.
And that's what kept him from realizing how big a mistake is he's like, I'm not a bad person. He took it personally.
Right.
And yeah, I just felt like, he wasn't necessarily a villain. He was a victim of hubris, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Kelly was referring to Mr. Lane. And I think
Yes.
in a situation that we live in a society today where we jump to conclusions very quickly. And I think that was a situation where this teacher saw it from one perspective and could not put himself in these students' shoes. And he saw them being, bratty and thoughtless and, out there in the media and in real life, in my research, this is how people in communities were responding to this. Like, how dare you do this to, our community? How could you do this? And I live in, not too far, like 2 hours away, there's a community where some students had given the Nazi salute for a prom photo. And that small town, forever in my mind, I will always connect that small town to this incident. And I did some research about what happened and transpired, and it actually reinforced everything that I had come to, conclude, was that something like this has a long-lasting impact in the minds of people. And it has an immediate impact where people will say, oh, I'm not going to go visit that town. Now, do I think it'll have a long-term impact? I don't know. Because we really, unless someone were to say, oh yeah, I have chosen never to go visit this town because, but we don't really have that kind of research. Without a doubt, I am going to remember these assignments. I think people that have read about these assignments, whether it's from this book or things that they've seen in the news, they're memorable because they stand out and they reinforce the worst in humanity instead of the best in humanity. And so we have to just work really hard to make a difference and to elevate the good and shine spotlights on the good in this world. And we know we're living in a time when that's not easy at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Liza, I just want to say one last thing about the assignment before we kind of move on to some other questions we have for you. I really loved your writing style. I think it's very unique. I've never really read a book that had sort of the same style, the way it switched point of views, in my opinion, very seamlessly. And I just think, you know, the way you're in the characters' heads, I enjoyed it a lot. Is, yeah, something I've never really seen before, I don't think. So
yeah, I love how it like unexpectedly would switch to a different character, one that you weren't necessarily expecting.
Yep.
Okay, that makes me so happy. Without a doubt, I think outside the box when it comes down to writing. I am a nonconformist. But if you're going to be a nonconformist, you have to make it work. And when I first decided that I was going to write this novel, I knew that I wanted to show many different perspectives. So my first few drafts were written in third person omniscient. And that is, the way to describe that is as if the reader is watching everything through a camera lens. So you would just shift from, you know, one perspective to another perspective. There's an author by the name of Laura Harrington, who is someone I really admire, and she does this so beautifully. And I very much wanted to emulate what she's done with her work. I saw when it was time to send it out to agents, pretty quickly I had 3 agents say to me, love this concept, but third person omniscient is not working. You need to rewrite this, and you need to do it in first person. And, you know, when one person tells you something, you can kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I knew I could not ignore these 3 agents who said this. So I had to start all over and reimagine how I was going to do this book. So I decided that I was going to take Cade and Logan, and they were going to be the main focus, first person, because there's a deep connection when something is written in first person. When something's written in third person, there's a little bit of a distance. So for me, that was kind of giving the reader the global view, a more global perspective. And I wanted them to have importance, and I want to show the impact of this assignment, not just on these 2 main characters, Cade and Logan, but also on other classmates, on the school, on the community, and of course the global perspective. So that's why I integrated comments. That's why I integrated articles. I wanted to also show that there was a different perspective. So Cade and Logan are in a small town, but wouldn't an assignment fly in a different community? And so I wanted to show that, and that's why Blair, Cade's cousin, was brought in. But how do you do that? So I had to use modern technology and incorporate it in that way. And it was a lot of fun to do this. And I also wanted to keep the chapters short, because this is a book that I want to be accessible for all readers, whether, you know, you're a passionate reader and, you know, you can read adult books, or, you know, you are someone who's a reluctant reader, or a person who has some disabilities and it's a bit of a struggle. I want that to be accessible to all. And I think this writing style lends itself to this. And so it's kind of a great time for me to tell you that this book is also going to be in an audiobook. And there are 10 narrators. And these narrators, you can just imagine how they're going to be bringing all of these characters to life and these experiences. I'm really, really excited for this audiobook.
That sounds awesome. I love a full cast for an audiobook.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that sounds great.
So Lisa, you are a podcast listener.
I love your podcast.
So we've done, this is our 15th regular episode, plus some bonus episodes. Is there an episode of the podcast that was a topic that you want to comment on, or kind of give a listener's perspective, or have something to contribute?
So I love when you guys have guests, and when you're talking about books that have become movies and the impact, which movie did a really great job of, reflecting the book. So I really I got totally into that. I also really enjoyed your interview with the author of Darius the Great Is Not Okay. That was really fun. I mean, I guess what I'm finding really interesting about this is that I'm discovering books that I would never read normally, just because they're, thrillers, and I'm like, wow, they had that author on there. This sounds really intriguing to me. So I've actually added books to my to be read list because of this. And it's just, you guys are fun. So, there's so many great lines.
Like twirling my evil mustache. Like, yes, your TBR pile is getting bigger and bigger.
True. It's so much fun. And I love the analysis of, just, I don't know, you guys really delve into it. It's great.
Yeah, how we overthink everything.
I love it.
It does sound nicer when Liza says it, though.
Yeah, it really does.
Oh, another segment that I also really love that you guys do is news, like things that we wouldn't necessarily have heard. So this is a great source to find out some of those things that we would never know are coming up about a book, unless you just happen to catch it somewhere. So I love the fact that you highlight those kind of things. It's great.
That's good to know. Yeah. It was good to get feedback from the listeners, so we know what people like to hear on the podcast.
The time goes by really quickly too when I'm listening.
Well, I think since you've gotten recommendations from us, now is the time to turn the tables. So we always end our interviews asking our guests to tell us what we should read. So what should we read? What can you recommend to us?
Well, I recommend this to absolutely everyone. So if it hasn't been read yet, I know you're anticipating, but I absolutely love Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's an absolute must. I think it will end up being one of the most influential books of, this, perhaps even the century. For sure this decade. And then, of course, stamped by Jason Reynolds and Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, I also think is really important. We're at a time now where people are becoming very much aware that the history we were taught in school missed a great deal of what was true. It was completely eliminated from our textbooks, and I feel in many ways we have been cheated because this history wasn't included.
So I think I caught the gist of what you were saying, and I agree about Ibram X. Kendi's books, but the last few sentences kind of cut out. So you were just saying how important it is for us to relearn our history and Black history and history of Indigenous peoples, because so much of what we were taught in schools missed so much and really just presented a whitewashed view of things and it's on us now to go back and read what really happened to have a better understanding.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for me, those two books are just absolutely critical for today. And I also recommend that that people pick up the audiobooks. So if you are like, oh my goodness, I'm so intimidated by the length of this book, or these books are read by the authors. So to me, they make it extra special. So I highly recommend the audiobooks. Don't be intimidated. For those of you out there that are like, no, I have a hard time with history. It's okay. Get the audiobooks and you will embrace it.
I agree. Yeah.
So do you have an independent bookstore that you'd like to shout out near you?
Absolutely. Boswell Books. They are absolutely amazing. Daniel Golden is the owner. They've been in business, I believe, for 1,200 plus days. They count every day. And so, like all indie bookstores, we have to do everything we can to be supportive.
Totally.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Liza, for joining us. This was great. It was so great to finally have you on as a guest.
I am so honored. You guys are amazing. And I will continue to watch and recommend and promote, because I don't listen to that many podcasts, but this for me is a do not miss. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks again to Liza for joining us. Everybody pick up a copy of the assignment. It comes out today, Tuesday, August 25th, and it's so good. We all loved it. So definitely a must read. And be sure to follow us on social media at WYSR_podcast on Instagram and Twitter. You can send us an email at whatyoushouldreadpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Goodreads at What You Should Read Podcast, and please be sure to give us a rating and a review.
And now you know what you should read.
You're welcome.